My stepfather said I'd never amount to anything, so I bought his dream house and made him watch me live in it. The morning after my high school graduation, I woke up to find my stepfather standing in my doorway with that familiar sneer plastered across his face. He had this way of looking at me that made my skin crawl, like I was some kind of parasite that had infected his perfect little world. My mom had married him when I was 12, and from day one he made it crystal clear that I was nothing more than baggage that came with the woman he loved. That particular morning, he was holding my report card in his hands, shaking his head slowly as he examined my grades. I had managed to pull off a 3.2 GPA despite working part-time at a local grocery store to help my mom with expenses, but apparently that wasn't good enough for him. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, just staring at me with those cold, calculating eyes that always made me feel like I was being measured and found wanting. The silence in that small bedroom was suffocating, broken only by the sound of my younger half-sister watching cartoons in the living room. I remember thinking about how different our lives were, how she got to enjoy Saturday morning cartoons while I was already planning my escape from this toxic household. The walls of my room were covered with posters of cities I dreamed of visiting, places far away from the cramped two-bedroom apartment we called home. He finally spoke, his voice dripping with disdain as he told me exactly what he thought of my future prospects. According to him, I was destined for failure, doomed to spend my life flipping burgers or stocking shelves, never amounting to anything more than a disappointment. The words hit me like physical blows, each one carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage on my already fragile self-esteem. What hurt the most wasn't just the cruelty of his words, but the way my mother stayed silent in the kitchen, pretending not to hear as her husband systematically destroyed her eldest son's confidence. I could smell the coffee brewing and hear the sizzle of bacon in the pan, normal sounds of a normal Saturday morning that felt completely surreal given the emotional warfare happening just a few feet away. That afternoon, I found myself walking through the wealthy neighborhood on the other side of town, the place where all the successful people lived in their perfect houses with their perfect lawns. I had discovered this area years earlier during one of my long walks when home became too unbearable, and it had become my escape, my window into a world I desperately wanted to be part of. There was one house in particular that always caught my attention, a beautiful two-story colonial with white columns and a wraparound porch that looked like something out of a magazine. The yard was immaculate, with perfectly manicured hedges and a fountain in the center of the circular driveway. I had spent countless hours walking past that house, imagining what it would be like to live there, to have that kind of success and stability. On that particular day, I noticed a for sale sign in the front yard, and my heart sank a little knowing that my fantasy house would soon belong to someone else. I stood there for a long time, memorizing every detail of the property, from the ornate front door to the large windows that probably offered stunning views of the surrounding landscape. The following Monday, I started my first day at a local electronics store, determined to prove my stepfather wrong even if it killed me. The manager was a decent guy who seemed to appreciate my work ethic, and I threw myself into learning everything I could about the business. I spent my lunch breaks reading industry magazines and my evenings studying online courses about sales and marketing. Within 6 months, I had become the top salesperson in the store, consistently outselling colleagues who had been there for years. My commission checks were getting bigger, and for the first time in my life, I was actually saving money instead of just scraping by. The feeling of financial progress was intoxicating, like a drug that made me want to work even harder. My stepfather noticed my success but refused to acknowledge it, instead making snide comments about how retail work was still beneath his standards. He worked in middle management at a manufacturing plant and acted like he was some kind of corporate executive, constantly reminding me that real success meant wearing a suit and tie to work every day. The tension at home continued to escalate, with daily arguments about my future and constant reminders of how I was wasting my potential. My mother tried to play peacemaker, but it was clear that she was torn between supporting her son and keeping her husband happy. The stress was eating away at our family, creating an atmosphere of constant conflict that made every meal feel like a battle. One evening, while browsing real estate websites on my phone, I stumbled across a listing that made my heart skip a beat. It was the house from the wealthy neighborhood, the one with the white columns and wraparound porch that I had been dreaming about for years. The price was astronomical, more money than I had ever imagined having, but something inside me clicked into place. I spent the next 3 years working like a man possessed, taking on every extra shift and side project I could find. I moved out of my family's apartment and into a tiny studio closer to work, cutting my expenses to the bone and saving every penny I could. My social life became non-existent, but I was driven by something deeper than the need for fun or relaxation. The electronics store became my laboratory for learning about business, and I started paying attention to the wholesale side of things. I noticed inefficiencies in the supply chain and began making suggestions to the owner about how we could cut costs and increase margins. My ideas were good enough that he started giving me more responsibility, essentially treating me like a junior partner. By my 21st birthday, I had saved enough money to make a down payment on a small duplex in a decent neighborhood. The rental income from the other unit helped cover most of my mortgage, and I was finally starting to build real wealth instead of just earning a paycheck. The feeling of ownership was incredible, knowing that I was building something that nobody could take away from me. My stepfather's reaction to my real estate investment was predictably dismissive, claiming that anyone could buy a rundown duplex and that it didn't represent real success. He had moved my mother and sister into a slightly larger apartment, but they were still renting, still at the mercy of landlords and lease agreements. The next few years were a blur of calculated risks and strategic moves that would have impressed any business school professor. I leveraged the equity in my duplex to buy another property, then another, slowly building a portfolio of rental units that generated passive income. Each purchase was carefully researched and analyzed, with backup plans for every possible scenario. I also started a small side business buying and selling electronics, using my industry knowledge to identify undervalued items and flip them for profit. The internet was making it easier than ever to connect buyers and sellers, and I was positioned perfectly to take advantage of the growing online marketplace. My stepfather's criticisms became more desperate as my success became harder to ignore, shifting from predictions of failure to dismissive comments about how I was just lucky or how real estate was a bubble waiting to burst. He seemed genuinely frustrated that his prophecies of doom weren't coming true, as if my success was somehow a personal attack on his worldview. The breakthrough came when I was 25 and had built my real estate portfolio to the point where I could quit my day job and focus on investing full-time. I had developed relationships with contractors, property managers, and real estate agents who helped me find and manage increasingly profitable deals. One afternoon, while reviewing potential properties with my agent, she mentioned a listing that had just come on the market in the wealthy neighborhood I used to walk through as a teenager. My heart started racing before she even showed me the address, somehow knowing exactly which house it would be. It was the colonial with white columns, the same house I had fantasized about owning during those dark days when my stepfather was destroying my self-esteem. The current owners were relocating for work and needed to sell quickly, creating an opportunity for someone with cash and the ability to close fast. The asking price was substantial, but my portfolio had grown to the point where I could afford it without stretching myself too thin. I made an offer that same day, slightly below asking price but with a quick closing and no financing contingencies. The sellers accepted within hours, and I found myself owning my childhood dream house before I had fully processed what was happening. Moving day was surreal, watching professional movers carry my belongings into the same house I had stared at longingly for over a decade. The rooms were even more beautiful than I had imagined, with hardwood floors and crown molding that spoke of quality and craftsmanship. The master bedroom had a view of the backyard that included a swimming pool and mature oak trees that provided perfect shade. I had been living in the house for about a month when I decided it was time to invite my family over for dinner. My mother was genuinely excited about seeing my new place, but my stepfather's reaction was more complicated. He agreed to come, but I could tell he was struggling with the reality of my success. The evening started awkwardly, with my stepfather walking through the house with a forced smile while making comments about how expensive everything must be to maintain. He seemed to be looking for flaws, examining the paint job and asking pointed questions about property taxes and utility costs. My mother, on the other hand, was genuinely proud and kept commenting on how beautiful everything was, and how hard I must have worked to achieve this level of success. My half-sister, now a teenager, was impressed by the pool and the home theater system I had installed in the basement. Dinner was served on the back patio, overlooking the pool and garden that I had hired professionals to maintain. The evening was perfect, with a gentle breeze and the sound of water fountains creating an atmosphere of peace and prosperity. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. As we sat there eating and making small talk, I noticed my stepfather becoming increasingly quiet and withdrawn. He kept glancing around the property with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between admiration and resentment. The conversation flowed around him as my mother and sister asked questions about my business and future plans. After dinner, as we were sitting by the pool with drinks, my stepfather suddenly stood up and walked to the edge of the water. He stood there for a long time, staring at his reflection in the illuminated pool, and I could see his shoulders sagging with some kind of invisible weight. When he finally turned around, his face had changed completely. The arrogance and dismissiveness were gone, replaced by something that looked almost like defeat. He walked back to where we were sitting and, without making eye contact, began to speak in a voice I had never heard before. He told us about his own childhood, growing up in poverty with parents who never encouraged his dreams or ambitions. He talked about how he had always wanted to live in a house like this, how he had driven through neighborhoods like this one, imagining what it would be like to have that kind of success and security. The confession continued for what felt like hours, with details about his struggles with self-doubt and his fear that he would never amount to anything significant. He explained how my success had forced him to confront his own limitations and unfulfilled dreams, making him realize that he had been projecting his own fears onto me. He admitted that every cruel word he had spoken to me over the years had been rooted in his own insecurities and disappointments. He had convinced himself that if he could keep me from dreaming too big, he wouldn't have to face the reality of his own modest achievements. The cruelty had been his way of protecting himself from the pain of comparison. My mother sat in stunned silence as her husband revealed layers of himself that she had never seen before. My sister looked confused and uncomfortable, not sure how to process this vulnerable side of the man who had always projected such confidence and authority. I felt a complex mix of emotions as I listened to his confession, part of me wanting to feel vindicated, while another part felt genuinely sad for the broken man sitting across from me. The anger I had carried for so many years began to shift into something more complicated, a kind of pity mixed with understanding. The evening ended with an awkward goodbye, my stepfather unable to meet my eyes as he thanked me for dinner and congratulated me on my success. My mother hugged me tightly and whispered how proud she was, while my sister promised to visit again soon to use the pool. Over the following weeks, I found myself thinking about that evening and the unexpected turn it had taken. I had spent years planning my revenge, imagining the moment when I would prove him wrong and force him to acknowledge my success. The reality had been more complicated and less satisfying than I had anticipated. My stepfather began reaching out regularly, sending text messages about business opportunities and asking for advice about investments. The dynamic between us had shifted completely, with him now seeking my approval and guidance rather than offering criticism and doubt. I started including him in some of my business ventures, giving him small roles in property management and renovation projects. He approached these opportunities with an enthusiasm I had never seen before, as if he was finally getting the chance to be part of something successful and meaningful. The relationship between us slowly evolved from antagonistic to something resembling partnership, built on mutual respect rather than the old patterns of dominance and submission. My mother was relieved to see the tension finally dissipating, and family gatherings became enjoyable rather than stressful. 1 year after that first dinner, I hosted a larger family gathering that included aunts, uncles, and cousins who had heard about my success but hadn't seen the house. My stepfather took pride in giving tour and explaining the renovations we had completed together, presenting himself as part of the team rather than an outsider looking in. The most surprising development was how my stepfather began encouraging my sister to pursue her own ambitious dreams, supporting her college applications, and cheering her on rather than warning her about the dangers of aiming too high. He had learned from watching my journey that success was possible with hard work and determination. Looking back on that journey from angry teenager to successful adult, I realized that revenge had never really been the point. The house had been a symbol of everything I thought I wanted, but the real victory was in proving to myself that I could overcome the limitations others tried to impose on me. My stepfather's transformation was unexpected but genuine, showing me that people are capable of change when confronted with undeniable evidence of their mistakes. The man who had once predicted my failure became one of my biggest supporters, helping me expand my business and celebrating each new achievement. The house itself became less important as the years passed, evolving from a symbol of rebellion into simply a comfortable place to live. I had achieved my goal of proving my stepfather wrong, but the process had taught me that success meant more than just acquiring material possessions or winning arguments. Today, I own multiple properties across the state and employ dozens of people in various aspects of the real estate business. My stepfather works part-time as a project manager for some of my smaller renovations, approaching each job with the dedication of someone who has finally found his purpose. The relationship with my family has healed in ways I never thought possible, with regular dinners and holidays that feel genuine rather than obligatory. My mother often comments on how different things are now, how much happier everyone seems when we're together. My half-sister graduated from college last year and is working in marketing for a tech company, pursuing her own version of success with the confidence that comes from having supportive family members who believe in her potential. She still visits regularly to use the pool and often brings friends who are impressed by what she calls her brother's empire. The colonial house with white columns remains my primary residence, but it no longer feels like a trophy or a statement. It's simply home, filled with memories of family gatherings and business meetings, a place where I can relax and plan my next ventures. Sometimes I walk through the neighborhood where I used to dream about living, remembering that angry teenager who was so desperate to prove himself. The journey from that small apartment to this successful life taught me that the best revenge is simply living well and staying true to your own vision of success. The story serves as a reminder that our greatest critics often become our most unlikely allies when we refuse to let their limitations define our potential. My stepfather's transformation from antagonist to supporter shows that people can change when confronted with evidence that challenges their fundamental assumptions about success and failure. The house that once represented everything I thought I wanted became the foundation for something much more valuable: a healed family and a successful business built on principles of hard work, strategic thinking, and never accepting other people's limitations as your own truth.